Hi, I'm Owen, the host of the Australian Finance Podcast. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betashares, one of the leading providers of ETFs here in Australia. Serving thousands of financial advisors and over 1 million investors, Betashares manages tens of billions of dollars on behalf of investors right across the country. I'm proud to partner with Betashares on the Australian Finance Podcast, Australia's premier financial podcast, because there is great alignment in the long-term philosophy shared by both businesses. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
So welcome to this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast. This episode's part of our summer series, and today we're on episode 5 and we're jumping into all things debt. So I'm Gemma Mitchell and I'm here with Owen, and today I'm putting Owen in the hot seat and asking him all the questions.
I feel like you should be the one, Gemma, that answers these questions because you definitely have more experience dealing with clients in this regard.
Absolutely, but what we might do is you do it and then I'll just judge or tell you if you're wrong.
Okay, you tell me. You give me a score out of 10. Tell me how I go.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Okay.
And then we'll see if we can make you a money coach.
Okay, sounds good. I'm down for that. So yeah, my topic is debt.
Debt.
And if you're listening to this, it means that you've tuned in for an episode or you're watching on YouTube and you've come to us most likely as part of the summer series, or this is your first episode you've tuned in for and you're thinking, I have a problem with debt. And so a lot of people do, I think it's fair to say. You know, the average mortgage in Australia is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. A lot of people have credit card debt. A lot of people experimented with buy now, pay later a few years ago. It's still a thing. There are still, we talked about before us in the office, about those nasty things called payday loans. But then there are the things that no one really seems to talk about as much, which are like loans to family. And like interrelationship style things where it's like, they're real. And I've been through that. I know all about that.
They can have devastating consequences on relationships.
Yeah, I've seen siblings break up because like no longer talk to each other because they bought a house together and they shared a loan and someone didn't pay their part of the loan and there was a misunderstanding and now...
Or they're trying to get out of that situation that worked at some point but no longer works.
Yeah, and that's
messy.
So much more common. And there's no real official statistics on that because there's not like a thing that people talk about that much, but it's very much real in my experience. So I think there's a kind of two sides to this. There's the side of debt that's mostly bad and people's, I guess, perception and emotions around it are negative. Mm-hmm. But then there are some people, probably like myself, Gemma, that actually don't see debt as all bad. And I actually think it can be really productive for people's financial situation once you know how to use it.
Yes, I 100% agree. So I don't think debt's a bad thing. It depends on how you actually use it. And for a lot of us, debt helps us get where we need to go. It helps us build assets or get out of bad situations or, take opportunities. It's a tool that we can utilize in life. You just got to use it for good, not evil.
I wanted to ask you a question, a bit of a rhetorical, because I know you might ask me some questions. Points hacking, like with credit cards, is that something that you do?
I personally don't, but I know people who do it successfully. But most people can't do it successfully. So banks, credit card lenders, are not in the business of losing money. Generally, when I see people using their credit cards for points, they are overspending, they're paying surcharges, they are more than paying for the benefits that they're later getting. So for most people, I don't think, in my personal experience, it actually works out, but there are some people that can do it very well, but that's not everybody.
It's funny because in the last few years, you tap your phone, tap your card at the cashier, and you see the surcharge now, whereas you never did in the past.
Yes.
Because people didn't understand how that whole murky world worked. Normally it was the business, like the cafe, that would pay for Amex.
But now it's
you see it pop up on your screen and it's called a surcharge. That's them. That's you paying for your points.
Your points, yeah. So people go, I got a $400 free flight. And I'm like, no, you didn't. You probably tapped your card 400 times and paid $1 here and there.
Yeah.
And then you paid the annual fee as well. But there are some people that do it very well. And yeah, we've Lexi Smith has talked about that she could do it successfully. I think Tash Invests also talks about how it works for her. So it absolutely can, but in my experience, for the majority, it doesn't. And it didn't work for me because my behaviours changed when I use a credit card. So I've identified that that's not a tool that I want. Yeah. But let's get into it.
Okay.
Because you're answering the questions.
Sure.
So tell us, what is debt and why is it important to understand it?
Well, so debt's pretty straightforward. You take money and then you pay it back. That's pretty much it. But typically there's interest that goes along with it. The finance industry is very ironic with a lot of things. And one of the things that they tend to do is they tend to say, if you're a riskier person, we charge you more. Mm-hmm. Which in reality, normally the things in the world, you don't pay more because you're more vulnerable. It's normally the other way around. The wealthier wouldn't pay. They'd be paying more interest because they can afford it. But in finance, we tip that on its head and we say, well, if you're risky, we're going to charge you even more, yes. Which makes it doubly as dangerous for people. So it's really important to understand the relationship. And I think one of the really good illustrations of this is if you go to the Money Smart website, which is the official government website, moneysmart.gov.au, or just type into Google compound interest calculator. And if you put in like just basic amounts, like say $100 a month or $100 a week, and you show what that could become over time, it looks like this really nice chart, and it goes bottom left to top right. So it kind of curves up like a hockey stick. Now, if you imagine debt, it's actually that in reverse. So flip it downwards and it's going down. If you just let it go, it would just compound down. And, I think it was Ben Franklin who was attributed with this quote that says, it's compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it.
Yeah. And I love that quote.
Yeah, and it's so true because debt is basically the bank compounding against you, whereas investing is you compounding against everything else. And so you can either make your money work for you or against you. And for the most part, debt does work against you.
Yes.
But you can use it in a way that can be productive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you need to understand it, and that's the key thing. People tend to be able to understand compounding interest in terms of investing a little bit easier, like people that have been listening to the podcast a while, but they don't actually then go and apply the same logic to debt. But if you jump on like a calculator for mortgage interest, you might see that you've borrowed $1 million. But then if you see the interest over a 30-year, it's probably more than $1 million in most interest rate environments. So yes, your house might have grown in value to 2 mil, but you've outlaid that in interest if you've been paying off that debt the whole time.
Yeah. And that's where one of so I can talk a little bit about like what is good debt and what is bad debt. I'll maybe introduce another category, which is good, bad, and ugly.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought you were going to say good, bad, and okay.
Oh, good, bad, and okay. No, I think I might go good, bad, and ugly. So I think that good debt is when you use debt, either from the bank or whatever, and you put it into something like you've mentioned in the previous episode, which is assets.
Yeah.
So I would consider using debt to buy an investment property is a good amount of debt. Not a good amount, a good use of debt. Whether or not the property is a good investment, who knows? But yes. I think if you use debt to buy something that goes up, it's typically a good use of it. Typically, not always, but typically. Now, what might be an example of bad is this is where it gets a little bit nuanced, is I think bad debt this isn't the worst category, so don't worry about that. That's next.
Ugly's coming.
Ugly's coming. But bad debt would be things like car loans or even the mortgage on your home.
Yes.
So that's
a
different.
Liability. No.
Yeah. Because that's different to a mortgage on an investment. Because when you invest, the interest is tax deductible.
Yes.
Assuming a few criteria. But in the case of your home, it's not tax deductible, but it's still good to pay it down, but it is a liability. For car loans, I say it's in this kind of middle category because for a lot of people, they do need a car and they can't afford to buy one straight out. So I don't want to make you feel like you're penalised for that. Like if you're a tradie, you probably do maybe you don't need a brand new Ranger, which is probably like the controversial thing for any tradies out there, but maybe you do need, a secondhand Hilux or something to do your job. Or maybe if you've got kids, you do want something safe and reliable. That's okay. You're still not going to pay a terrible amount of interest on, say, a car loan because it's what we call secured. So when the thing that you're buying has a value that the bank can say, oh yeah, they bought a car, it's worth 10 grand. Mm-hmm. It's typically less interest.
Yes, if they secure it against that asset, which means if you default, the bank's coming after the car. And so then they're happy to charge less interest because they're like, cool, we're going to take your car if you don't pay us, and that's less risk on them. Yeah,
that's why a mortgage is so cheap, is because the bank's like, everyone needs a house. If you can't pay it, Gemma, we're just going to take it from you and sell it.
Sell it to someone else and get our money back.
Yeah, so we're not that worried. But if you say, oh, can I have $500,000 just cause? They're going to be like, no. Or if they are like, yes, they'll probably be like, well, it's going to be 50% interest and you need to let us know every day how you're going.
Yes, which is why it's harder to borrow for shares, why property investing is so much more accessible, because the banks are more comfortable with property, so they're more willing to lend. So people can get into those types of investments a lot easier than they can getting into a share portfolio and borrowing for that, because, the banks aren't as willing to use that as security.
So if we go one further leg down, which is to the ugly category, in my opinion, what I put in this category is credit cards, buy now, pay later, payday loans. So if you're not familiar with what a payday loan is, it's basically where they take your money and they say, well, you've got an income, we'll give you $500, $1,000 or $2,000, but the interest rates can be 30, 40, 50%. A lot of money. People aren't familiar. They used to be really popular. Cash Converters, Money3, Nimble. There's different names for them, but they all kind of do the same thing. While people would say, well, Afterpay, Zip, they don't charge me interest. Some of them do, and there are repercussions. Like if you default on one of those, the banks would want to know before they lend you on a mortgage. So you do want to be aware of that. So we've got good, bad, and ugly. But when it comes to managing these things, Gemma, I think you need to go in reverse. So you wouldn't try and get out a mortgage if you've got like a lot of credit card debt, and you wouldn't try and invest in an investment property unless you have at least thought about having your own home sorted with a, what we call owner occupier. And so, well, how do I get started on this journey of paying back debts? There's a really good book written in 1927 by George Clason. So there's a bit of a backstory about this, but George Clason, he wrote this book in 1927, and he used a story of someone in ancient Babylon to tell the story of how you should allocate your gold. And the first chapter is a bit weird, but it talks about using your gold to repay your friends and family. And the reason is that if you have some gold, you should pay them back what they've lent you, because it repairs the relationship and you feel amazing. And so some people, they might have borrowed money from friends or family. You probably know what I mean. I've borrowed money from friends and family, not so much friends, but definitely family. And every day when I would have my pay packet, or I would think I might go and, go fishing this weekend, I feel guilty because I'm like, I should be paying them back. And they might look at me and think, why is he doing that when he's not giving me my money back?
And I think that's where conflicts come from, because you might be like, well, I'm on this payment plan, but they're seeing you doing other things, going, well, that's resources that I could be having.
Yeah, and so you feel that sense of guilt towards them. So I think there's a silver lining to this, is that if you do start to pay them back, your relationship improves, but also your sense of accomplishment goes way up.
Yes.
So you go from this heavy burden to a sense of release. Yeah. Like, I've got it. And it's the same. I had a friend who had a lot of credit card debt for various reasons with CBA, and he came to me, and I could tell he was kind of like, he was a bit unsure of himself and, pretty proud type of guy and all this stuff. He's like, I got this debt and blah, blah, blah. How can I go about it? And I kind of just laid out a very basic plan. And I think it was 9 months later, had paid it off, went overseas, all fully paid for by like his own cash. And he was just ecstatic.
Guilt-free.
Yeah. And he started investing from that moment on. So it just kind of triggered all of these events.
What do you think is the best way to pay back debt, or what would you say are the typical kind of strategies that people focus on or options that they have to pay back debt?
So a lot of people that have kind of got in the credit card situation, unfortunately, a lot of the times that's come from, as you talked about in the budgeting episode, it's come from behaviours that have stemmed from other things. But then there are, of course, things that come from, those moments in life where you just don't have a choice. You're caught between a rock and a hard place. You've had to make a decision. Maybe your car's broken down. You've got to, the only way to pay for it was through the Amex on the link that they've sent you from the mechanic or something like this, you know?
Yeah, or to leave like a job that was unhealthy or a toxic relationship or whatever it was. Sometimes we need to use debt because it's the only option we have.
And that's why I don't begrudge anyone. Like I don't judge anyone for having debt because I've been there myself and I know what it's like to not have money. Like I know that feeling and I know what it's like to overcome it as well. So what I would say is if we think about a snowball rolling down the hill, there are different analogies that you can come up with, but I like this one and I like this as a strategy. So the avalanche strategy or the snowball strategy, there are many different ways to pay down debt, but what I would say is one of the ways is just to basically say, what is the debt that I can knock over quickly and start the habit of repaying things? Because you don't get satisfaction immediately out of paying a credit card off or something like that. But what are the things? Well, maybe I've got $500 on this credit card, or maybe I've got an afterpay debt, or maybe I owe George $50 or whatever the case may be. Start with those, write them all down, list them out and start snowballing. Pay one down, gives you momentum.
Smallest first, so you're seeing wins.
Yeah, see some people say pay the one with the highest interest or pay the one with the biggest balance.
Yes.
But psychologically, I don't think that rewards us for good behaviour.
So that can work, so the avalanche, that approach can work from a math perspective, so just numbers. But that's a hard slog. Yes, you're going after the one that has the highest interest. So it's from a math perspective, you're paying down the most expensive debt, but you're not seeing the progress and having those quick wins. I'm the type of person that if I've done something on my list that wasn't on my list, I'll write it down just so I can cross it off. So the snowball where I'm doing quick wins and seeing progress works a lot better, even though from a math perspective it doesn't make the most sense, but it makes a sense from traction and actually seeing results. Yeah,
well, if you do the little one and you do the next one, eventually they'll all be gone and you just have this amazing momentum.
Yes.
And you said before, off air, before we hit record, that you're obviously not dealing with the debt issues. You're dealing with how do I achieve my financial independence goals, right? And so for you celebrate when you get to a milestone.
Yeah.
I think the same thing should be for people that pay down debt.
Absolutely.
Celebrate. Maybe it's not going for a lavish overseas holiday once you pay off $50 of debt, but maybe it's you go to dinner or you take friends and you do something. I don't know. But
and setting milestones. So say if you've got $20,000 worth of debt, trying to go from $20,000 to zero, you're not going to see a lot of progress. So why don't maybe you'll maybe $500 is what helps your brain get really motivated, or maybe it's $1,000. You need to work out what amount, whether it's saving or paying down debt, what amount of money makes little things worth it. So for example, $5 going towards a $50,000 goal is it's doing nothing. $5 towards $100, I'm oh, well, I only need a few of those, a handful of them. So you need to work out what your brain likes the number of. So maybe you go, I'm not going to look at the total debt. I'm just going to go in parcels of $500 and that's what I'm going to focus on. And I just want to keep smashing out these 500. Just find whatever works for you. But any goal, you need to have little milestones that you can then celebrate.
There's some weird quantum mechanics type reference that maybe analogy no one would really appreciate except for the engineers. But I feel this is a problem that if you look at it, you solve it. And what I mean by that is if you are willing to look at your debt situation and you're willing to put it down on a piece of paper, I almost guarantee that you'll get on top of it.
Yes.
Because you've taken the hardest step of all, which is acknowledging that there's a problem and facing it.
Getting past that pattern that we were talking about in mindset of avoidance and actually saying, and we all, I believe from my experience and me personally, we sleep better if we have a plan.
Yep.
And I think avoiding things doesn't help. So just addressing it, and it might be a slow plan, but at least it steps in the right direction.
Well, you'd know this from financial planning days, is if you're dealing with any type of person, whether it's a retiree or someone that's still in their career, if you go through a market crash, it's a whole lot easier when you've got a plan because you don't have to think about it. You know what the plan says.
Yes.
Gemma, if it was you that was the person with the plan, you'd be previous Gemma, who was cool-headed while everything was going okay, has a plan that if this happens, do that.
Yeah.
And that sense of any direction is momentum. It's just such a wonderful thing. And so you can get support if you need it. I would say Money Coach, you're a Money Coach, you can feel everyone in here, but Money Coach can help guide you through debt and cash flow issues much cheaper than, say, a financial advisor. I wouldn't go to a financial advisor to help me deal with a credit card, for example.
Yes.
But I would call the National Debt Helpline if I was in real financial difficulty. I would also consider calling my bank and institutions to say, hey, I'm in a bit of strife. They have to have a hardship line. It's a requirement. And if you're not really that way inclined, talk to the National Debt Helpline about what they might be able to do for you on your behalf, or like to guide you through that. But those are the types of people. Now, I think with a coach is great because they can help you get to the point of where you like break even on your debts, but then also accelerate out the other side.
Yeah. And keep you like accountable and help you identify which is the best way for you to do things based on you, like your personality and what is actually going to be sustainable for you. So what your mate's doing or what your parents did to get out of debt might not actually work for you. So a coach has got like lots of experience, just like the debt counselors do, lots of experience on different ways to do that.
Yeah, we've actually, you can get matched to a money coach on our website. And one of the coaches, Lexi, who you brought up before, is like an absolute wizard at cash flow and all these types of things. We also have a free course, which is getting out and staying out of debt. I would just come back to one final thing to the good, bad, ugly. If we've solved the ugly, the bad debts, some of those things are going to be there. Well, I say bad debts. They're not really bad debts. Like having a mortgage on a home is not really a bad debt, but it's just like to frame it. But if you're using debt to invest, it is a superpower if you use it responsibly. And the way to know that is to educate yourself on debt recycling, maybe something called equity release. And that's where your mortgage broker and your financial advisor or your accountant. We've done separate episodes on debt recycling. So if you're interested like I am in that type of thing, or if you're in the financial independence, retire early community, or you're thinking about that, please go and check it out. But I will just leave everyone, Gem, with this idea that as a reminder, if you start to get on top of your debt and you look around your house, there's things you can sell to kind of put money on the first credit card and get your early wins. Maybe there's expenses that you've just did a bit of a detox in your bank statement and you realize, I don't need to spend money there. I could use that to pay back that debt or give Jimmy back his money over here. You know, you start to get the momentum. All of a sudden, it just takes on a life of its own. It's a really positive one. And before you know it, that weight is lifted. There's another saying like the Ben Franklin one, which is the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. And what that means is once you start the process and you get that snowball rolling, it becomes so powerful that it just keeps on going. No matter what you do, it's going to be a good habit that sticks with you for life.
Yes. And this is a habit then you can then apply to investing in things because it's literally just the habit of making steps going forwards and sticking with something. So once you've got this nailed, then you can apply it to different aspects of your wealth building.
It definitely doesn't feel like it now if you're in this. It doesn't feel like it now as a superpower, but once you're through it, it absolutely will. And it will keep you grounded and all those types of things. So recap. There are some ugly debts out there. Formulate a plan, list them down, away you go. There are some debts that are not like tax deductible, which may be just necessary. So maybe debt is around you for a very long time, and that's okay. But then there are good debts, and these can accelerate your journey to financial independence. I'm using them. I'm assuming you're using them. Absolutely, yep. So most financial advisors use them too. So there's certainly good debts that you can have in your life. So I think that's just something we've got to get used to. But Gem, this is your first episode where you hosted me.
I know.
This is a bit of fun.
Yeah, we should keep doing this. We'll put you in the hot seat more often.
Well, there's plenty more to come in the summer series. So if you do want to reach out to us, if you have had a win with debt recently or you use it in a particular way, I think debt recycling was their most common topic, most popular topic of all time on the Rask Network in 2024. Write into us, let us know. You can use the Ask a Question link in your podcast player or YouTube description to get in contact with Gemma or I. Just select the Australian Finance Podcast. Gemma, heaps of fun.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Betashares, one of the leading providers of ETFs here in Australia and a long-term partner of Rask. The summer series is special because Betashares are supporting us, and on the back of these episodes, I get to give you an ETF overview. Today, I'm talking to you about AQLT. This is the Australian Quality ETF from Betashares. Now, don't get lost yet. I know what you're probably thinking. There's a few words in there I don't truly understand. So let's imagine that you have an index ETF or just the most boring Australian ETF. This ETF covers all of the Australian market. If you put $100 in, you get $100 of whatever they say on the nightly news, the ASX 200 did, or something like that, like all Australian shares. But let's imagine for a moment that we don't just want all of the Australian shares as they come. Imagine you only want a particular type of company. You can get that through an ETF like this. And let's say you want high quality companies. You're probably thinking, well, Owen, doesn't everyone want high quality companies? Well, not always. Sometimes people do want the kind of hard businesses or the businesses in their portfolio that they know, like Telstra, they're really mature and these types of things. Maybe they're going to keep growing over time, but maybe they're not super high quality. Well, with the AQLT ETF, what it actually does is it screens through the Australian market and it looks for companies which it determines are quality, and it uses rules to do this. So this is what we call a rules-based ETF. And the ETF itself is looking for companies that have, factors or characteristics that make them higher quality than normal. So we're talking about companies that have a high return on equity. That's otherwise known as ROE. ROE is basically a way of saying how much profit does this company produce every year in proportion to the amount of shareholder money that's inside the business. We call that shareholder equity, and that's why we get return on equity. Higher equals better. Another thing that we look for with this ETF in particular is we're looking for companies that don't have a lot of debt. So this, in financial lingo, is called leverage. This ETF adds an extra factor or characteristic to the first one, which is companies with low amounts of leverage. So as you can imagine, kind of like if you had too much debt. Sometimes in a company, too much debt can be a bad thing as well. It can make management teams make the wrong decisions just because they need to pay their interest bill. And finally, we also want companies, this is the third factor, that are producing stable profits. So not only do we get, companies that have a spike in earnings, we are getting the companies that have stability in earnings through time. So you can't get one of those kind of one-hit wonder mining companies or a company that comes out with a great product and a great financial result one year only to see it flop the next year. We're looking for stability. So we've got high profitability, low amounts of debt, and stability in profits. It's a pretty wicked combo. So what AQLT then does is it puts the top 40 of those together, and you end up with a reasonably well-diversified portfolio of Australian companies. So how would you use an ETF like this? Well, you could use an ETF like this in a few different ways. One I see being pretty popular would be to have it as a satellite allocation. And by that I mean you have your core portfolio, but then off to the side here you have this kind of sub-portfolio, which most of the Rask community use, which is a core and a satellite approach. And you think, I want exposure to a higher quality Australian companies. Some investors might also put this ETF in their core because they think, if I just invest in the entire Australian share market, I'm going to get a lot of banks and I'm going to get a lot of resources companies. Now, to be sure, this ETF, AQLT, also invests in those things, but it screens all of those industries for quality. So you still end up with some companies from those industries, but it's important to understand you get the quality scores in there. So you could probably use this ETF alongside your existing ETF. Now, we've talked about in previous podcasts about the Betashares A200 ETF, which is one of the most popular Australian shares ETF. That's what I would call the vanilla ETF. It just kind of buys whatever is on the stock market. The top 200 companies by size, they're in that ETF. In this one, remember, we're cutting it up a bit and we're just getting the quality companies. With a fee of around about 0.35% per year, it's not that expensive, the AQLT ETF, if you ask me. But as always, if you're interested in investing in a Betashares ETF, just like this one, AQLT, head to the betashares.com.au website and be sure to check out the product disclosure statement, that's the PDS, and the TMD, otherwise known as the target market determination. These two documents actually tell you exactly what the ETF does, and the TMD tells you who it's right for. So you can make an assessment, a more informed assessment. And if you're confused, as always, you should speak to a licensed and trusted financial planner who can help you determine if an ETF is right for you before investing. Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.